working mostly on adaptation and resilience. Today, we will have several high-level panelists. One will be online, with a complex agenda, but we had the chance to have him online. It will be Walter Baethgen, Senior Research Scientist from International Research Institute for Climate and Society from the Columbia University. He will be the first presenter soon. Then, presenting in order, we will have Bruce Campbell, Chief Innovation and Strategist at Clim-Eat. Just if you can just stand for people to, but Bruce is, I guess everyone knows Bruce, so already. Then we will have, so Bruce will present really briefly the main finding. So he was able to read in a record of time the several pages of the report. He will explain. Then we will have a panel to discuss to reflect on what will be presented and compiled. So let me start. We will have Felicitas Röhrig. So if you can stand so people can recognize you. So she's Senior Policy Officer at BMZ, which stands for German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Then we will have James Birch, Senior Program Officer, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But you will have the time to see all of them after, because it was really fast. You are too shy. Then we have also in the panel Abel, Musumali, National Coordinator from Zambia, Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance. Please, Abel, come on in front, so it will be easier for you after to join the panel. The same. Then after we will have a conclusion. So Lwembe, Mwale. So also you can come here. We are sure you will not escape. I'm quite sure you will not. So from COMESA, he's project officer on our climate change program at COMESA. Every of the panelists can also complement what they are doing before talking, for sure. So when I received the invitation to moderate that event, I was really happy to see all the diversity of those panelists, also the organizer, on such an important topic. And I guess this is really the moment, Bruce will explain perhaps better than me, but we are here to act, or to find a way to act. So this is really important that we all exchange and we all understand where we are and find a way really to have first steps that are really in the right direction and that are fast enough to react to the need and the risk we are facing all. But without further ado, let's ask the specialists to present what they have to say. So Walter, if Walter is online, perhaps you can project. Okay, so Walter, thanks so much for accepting. And we are listening to you. And you have the panelists just in front of you, so also they can see you all perfectly. So over to you, please.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and sorry for not being there in person. I hope you can hear me okay. So I start with a note. I think we are making good advances in climate action. The energy sector, as you know, of many countries are changing dramatically. And it makes sense. Energy is responsible for more than 70% of the greenhouse gases that are behind climate change. And today, a megawatt generated with renewable energy is cheaper than a megawatt generated with fossil fuels. And this is before the war. And one key factor that is making this possible is huge injections of funds in renewable energy. But I think we still see an unbalanced efforts and investments in mitigation and adaptation. Of course, one of the reasons is that mitigation is directly related to the problem, to the emissions of greenhouse gases. I also believe that mitigation is perceived as actions that benefit the whole world. So we reduce greenhouse gases, we have a good impact on global climate. However, adaptation is often seen as efforts that benefit a country or a region within the country. And this is something that I believe we need to make an effort to change. Because adaptation, of course, increased resilience have also global impacts. Just think of the impact of the lack of a resilient food production system. What is the impact they have on conflict, on migration, on general political instability? Now, the report of the Working Group II in the Assessment Report 6 states that it's uncontestable evidence that extreme events are increasing in intensity and increasing in frequency. And I think that we need to make explicit the connection of those extreme events and the need to improve adaptation, the need to increase resilience, the connection of those things with political stability, migration, food security. And the other issue is that some of these investments that are going on in mitigation, of course, are threatened by extreme events. The other issue that I found very interesting in the report is the promotion of ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based adaptation. These are all win-win solutions. They preserve natural ecosystems and they increase resilience. Think, for example, of the impact of good, healthy mangroves, the impact of reducing coastal floodings, or the impact of regenerated natural ecosystems like forests or wetlands or natural grasslands, the impacts on mitigating droughts, or the ability to produce food in livestock systems that preserve natural ecosystems, the impact of reforestation on wildfires, on landslides, on sandstorms. Now, as we know, action at the bigger scale happens when you have a strong involvement of the private sector. And there's also a nice positive note here. There's a lot of ESG, or green bonds, that are being issued. The current estimation of the market of these ESG bonds is about $35 trillion. And they're expected to grow by 2050 to $50 trillion. There are several countries that are issuing sovereign bonds. That is, countries borrow money and the interest rates that they will pay are subject to their performance in sustainability issues. There are good examples in Chile, in Uruguay, in Indonesia. Now, the majority of these green bonds are targeting low carbon strategies. The majority are for renewable energy, clean transportation, waste management. We need more of these ESG green bonds on climate change resilience, on improved adaptations, sustainable land uses, sustainable food systems, regeneration of ecosystems. Today, although it's difficult to track precisely, but it's estimated about 90% of the bonds target mitigation efforts and less than 10% are targeting resilience or adaptation. And many of those are backed by sovereign bonds. So it's an effort from governments. We need more private sector investment. We need to ensure that we increase the support to this improved adaptation, resilience. Again, the tremendous advances in renewable energy were possible by public policies that stimulated investments and huge amounts of private investments in renewable energy. One key area where we need to improve adaptation to increase resilience is in food systems, and Bruce, I know that Bruce will present this. So I'll leave with 3 final messages. One, we need more balance in the efforts in adaptation and in increased resilience compared to what's happening in mitigation. Two, we need to make more explicit the global impact of improving adaptation, the connection of resilience, food production systems with political instability, with food insecurity, with migration. And three, we need action similar to what happened in the renewable energy sector. We need public policies that promote investment in improved adaptation and increased resilience. One, because they are needed to protect many of these huge investments that are being done in mitigation. And two, because it is also key for the political stability to reduce food insecurity and to reduce problems related, for example, with migration. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for setting so nicely the scene. I can really have two, for me, and I guess we agree to share perhaps that we can recognize really the lack, that adaptation is really lagging behind on what a lot of time, I guess you mentioned, without saying the word, but holistic approach, linking better adaptation mitigation. We need really to have that more global view, holistic views, when we will also act to really reverse that tendency that you are really clear, less than 10% of the 35 trillions of bond going to resilience and adaptation, and this is really something that we have to revert. So thanks so much for that. I hope you can stay online, so we will call you perhaps back when the panelists will also react. Now, perhaps we will move without further ado with the presentation from Bruce. So Bruce there is online already, we will share with the participant. I don't know if you have the link also to your brief at the end of your presentation. No, okay, so but we will share after with all of you and give you the link of the publication. So Bruce compile all also in a few pages document compared to what let's say the size of the IPCC report, but he was really extracting what you can see here, what are climate change impact and adaptation options in the agri-food system. Oh, we have it here. So it's something perhaps scarce. How many exemplars we have here? 10. So too few. So
10.
But it's online. So Bruce, please.
Okay, so I'm going to focus on climate change impacts and adaptation options. This is what the assessment report number 6, AR6, with the IPCC has just come out. It's about 3,000 pages, and so I've been skimming it to look for all the food stuff in all the different chapters. I'm going to focus on new areas of emphasis in this assessment report. The impacts, which is, the bottom line is there's no good news almost. And then adaptation, and 3 points. A lot of maladaptation occurring. There's many options occurring at farm level, but they're really not good enough to deal with climate change. And then the bottom line is really getting the enabling environment right. So new areas of emphasis. So throughout the assessment reports, it started off with no agriculture, and then it got to crop yields, projections and things. The last AR5 really took a food system approach, a very holistic approach. And this AR6 has also come up with a whole lot of new areas. So for example, for the first time, it's linking climate change to migration and conflict with actual observed studies. There's a much bigger social science input into the assessment report, and that means more on indigenous knowledge, more on gender and social inclusion, more on health and nutrition aspects. Walter's already mentioned there's a big piece on ecosystem-based adaptation throughout the report, not only in the food chapter. past reports have been criticized because they focus on crops. This one has got a really good coverage of livestock, of fisheries, and for the first time there's a mixed systems section, and the mixed systems are super crucial in the global south. And then it's got a lot on maladaptation, which is a big warning for us. Now, I'm not going to be able to cover all this stuff, and hopefully some of the panelists will pick up on it. So, observed impacts. Extremes, reducing economic growth up to 15 years after the events. Slowed growth on agricultural productivity. And these effects are throughout the value chain, right from the yields to the consumer end. There's many aspects covered in the report, and I haven't got time to go through all of them. This is just some of the highlights I picked out. There's some really nice tables in the report. This is observed impacts on major crop species and crop categories. The negatives are negative impacts of climate change, positive impacts, and stars are there's mixed impacts, some positive, some negative. And I mean, for me, I'm from Zimbabwe. Sub-Saharan Africa has got negatives right throughout. There's only one region in this which has got more positives than negatives, that's Central Asia. Generally, there's not really a lot of good news about climate change. The projected impacts, they also do what are the future impacts, and once again, lots of bad stories. But one of the ones that really picked out for me, this is the first time they've said categorically that some areas will go out of production because they're climatically unsuitable by 2050. A new piece that they're saying is increased, potentially concurrent events will periodically increase simultaneous crop losses across major food-producing regions. So this is, in other words, a collapse in Australia, a collapse in Southeast Asia, a collapse at the same time. That has major implications for the food system. So then going on to adaptation, and I wanted to just cover 3 points. First one's around maladaptation. So this is a statement. Existing climate policies do not adequately consider trade-offs, adaptive limits, cumulative costs, and potential risks of maladaptation. And what's frightening for us as agricultural development specialists is that the examples they give are all the things that we usually do. Agricultural intensification, irrigation, improved cultivars, social safety nets, digital agriculture, credit. So they find examples of maladaptation in all the things that we think are great. And, that just goes back to the fact that agriculture is super context specific. What a farmer in southern Zimbabwe can do is different from a farmer in central Zimbabwe. Irrigation in one place is great. Irrigation in another place done in a certain way is terrible. That's why I hate anybody who says they've got the solution and give me the name of that solution. The next thing, which I really think is important, is that autonomous and incremental on-farm options are not good enough. So this is things that we do with farmers on the ground. And they go on, here's a statement, implemented adaptation in crop production will be insufficient to offset the negative effects of climate change if we go beyond 1.5, and especially, which we're going to do, and if we go beyond 2 degrees. And they also say that those kinds of options, we are not going to achieve SDG 2. There's no way we're going to achieve SDG 2. The other thing is they say while there's a lot of options out there and things that can be done, there's a lack of information on the economic and institutional feasibility of these things. So we've got lots of agronomic information and how you can do things, but economic and institutional is lacking. And also on the limits to adaptation. So if we do a certain tillage mechanism, how far is it going to be useful at certain temperatures? And then the third piece that I want to talk about is I think that they've done a great job on the enabling environment. And for me, this is the absolutely crucial piece to get right. And so I start with the easy pieces. Expanded climate and extension services and early warning systems. So we know that, but we have to get it right. And although I say it's easy, That's, it's not exactly easy, but those are the kinds of things we have to do. Mobilization of and access to adequate financial resources. That's still easy, but we know it's not so easy. Social protection programs. Insurance, index-based insurance. Policies and market instruments with clear goals and priorities to get markets working, to get farming systems functioning. Institutional frameworks, coordination within government, flexible planning, inclusive planning, long-term planning. Those are the things that we have to get. And, as agricultural scientists, we may say this is getting out of our comfort area, but I would say that if we don't get involved in this stuff and we keep doing agronomic type interventions, we're not going to get anywhere near where we need to be. Now we get to the difficult ones, dealing with structural vulnerabilities. So chronic poverty, structural vulnerabilities in relation to gender have to be tackled. So, we can work with farmers, we can help them cope with climate change, we can help them with climate hazards. But if they're not going to get out of poverty, they're going to be hit by climate change all the time. So we have to really think about structural vulnerabilities in relation to gender, poverty, etc. This means fantastic coordination from local level action to national level action, fantastic coordination across the various ministries that should be involved to deal with poverty. And then the last one, which is perhaps even more difficult, is political commitment and follow through. And as agriculturalists, if we want to solve the food system, we have to get involved in it. Raising public awareness, building business cases for adaptation, accountability and transparency mechanisms. So stop with all the great stories and get KPIs about different kinds of things, and let's make sure that we're getting that way. Mainstream adaptation into institutional budget and policy planning cycles. Monitoring and evaluation of adaptation progress. Social movements can be really important in fostering change. Fostering advanced knowledge on impacts and solutions, and perhaps Walter mentioned some of that, for example, understanding the links between climate change and migration. So what do we have to do tomorrow? Which areas will go out of production? What are the transformation options for marginal areas where chronic poverty persists? We have to solve those kinds of issues if we're going to solve climate change issues. What are the adaptation options to counter these simultaneous failures that we're going to get across the world in terms of the food systems? What strategies can be used to avoid maladaptation? What are the economics and financials of these diverse adaptation options that we've got on farm, and what are their limits to adaptation? And most of all, getting the enabling environment right. Which country has got it right? Let's give the food price to a country that gets it right. Let's learn about what it takes to get the enabling environment right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sharp, efficient, as always. So, I guess you started with bad news, but I guess we are more here solution than we will see if we have the solution, as you are saying, if we are able to identify and to put in place the enabling environment with all the different pieces we need to assemble the different part of the puzzle. Now, you mentioned a lot of different nexus we have to implement. Poverty, climate change, gender, climate change, farmer, climate change, all of them together, adding on top of what Walter was mentioning, mitigation, adaptation together. So, to reflect on that, I will call the panelists. Bruce, please stay. You can stay here or here if you are more comfortable. We have enough room. So, the panelists, please, once again, I realize that I forgot my colleagues at the beginning, so she will not be any longer my friend after. So first, Julia Wolf, my colleague from FAO. It's always, the more evidence you have in front of you, you are always forgetting. So the other panelists, please. Felicitas Röhrig, so BMZ. Then we have Abel also, Musumali, Zambia, Climate Smart Agriculture Alliance, and James already on the panel, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it's good to have such a diversity of panelists. And here the question is simple. So I will ask you to provide in a few minutes your reflection on what you have heard. I will just follow the order I have here. I will start with you, James. Or you don't want to start? It's fine. You are ready? Sure. Because here it's all about adaptation, so we can adapt. Okay, so good. So perhaps in your thought, I want perhaps if you can focus on what would, according to you, the key areas that need support to close that gap. I guess we started, and this is in the title of the event, the gap for adaptation. So if you can tackle that in your reflection, but also please feel free to, because perhaps when you were listening, something was really ringing a bell on what you are doing. So please, over to you.
Great, thank you very much. So I think in terms of reflections on the Working Group II reports, what I took away was that adaptation efforts to date have been fragmented, reactive, too small a scale. So I think funders like ourselves and other funders, climate funders beyond that have to do a better job of working together. We definitely see a comparative advantage of the work that we support around research and innovation. That doesn't mean that it's the only solution, but it has to be part of the solution. And the report highlighted the reactive nature of adaptation funding to date. We know that we need to adapt to a range of different climate scenarios. We know that it's context specific, and so we need to be thinking a little bit more about that. I think the other piece that I took away was the complexity of the risks, that these are now being compounded by non-climate challenges, that there are cascading risks throughout the systems as well, and the longer we take to act, the harder it's going to be to address these. And the final thing I took from it is around the sort of the nuance. So a lot of the talk is around global averages, and obviously that obscures regional variations. So we're at a 1.1 degree world, but for land mass in Africa, it's actually considerably higher than that already. And if we get to a 2 degree world, it's going to be even worse as well. So we need to be thinking about that nuance, both in terms of the impact, but also the solutions. And that's why locally led adaptation is such a critical principle as we go into this. In terms of parts of the solution, finance, you can't separate it from the wider discussions. At COP26, there was a commitment by so-called developed countries to double adaptation funding by 2025. Obviously, geopolitically, the world has changed a little bit since then, but we really need a plan to deliver on that so that it doesn't erode trust and become another broken promise. Within that, the finance is going to sort of still be below what's required, so we need to have some sort of prioritization around sort of needs for sensitive sectors, vulnerable populations and countries. It needs to be grant finance primarily. I mean, we do need other forms of funding to come online, but until the investment case for private sector and others is more robust, we really need grant public finance to support these needs. And access to finance is also key. We need to change the way that works. We need to compromise on what it means to have a robust business case and work with local organizations to ensure that they're getting the funding that they need. Similarly, in terms of policy, you can't detach this from the global goal and adaptation, the stock take. We need a robust local assessment of what the needs are to inform this, and that has to be linked to the financing discussion as well. I would say that for us, just briefly, our organization tries to work at 3 levels. One is around that sort of global public goods, the innovation side of things, trying to find new solutions that can unlock ambition, accelerate action. We're trying more to move towards a sort of supporting country systems as well as effective mechanisms getting behind NAPs and other sort of national policy instruments, but there needs to be coherence between all the different policy pieces. And then we're trying to get better equitable leadership, so supporting organizations that are based in the countries where they're on the front lines of climate change and supporting them through core support. So things like the African Adaptation Initiative, Agnes, the AAA initiative at a continental level, but also trying to do more of that at the national level as well. And then finally, I would just say that this agenda needs to have some sort of accountability to it as well. And I think the Glasgow Breakthrough on Agriculture is interesting in that regard, in that it could have a coherent set of metrics and measures that at every subsequent COP we assess, are we replacing unsustainable solutions with sustainable solutions, and start to try and hold people to account. I think one interesting area for our work is how the commitments on biodiversity and nature are starting to sort of have discussions about livelihoods as well. So unless we can ensure more resilient livelihoods, more resilient production, agriculture will continue to be a major driver of land use change, and that's going to be an undermining some of the wider commitments that countries are making to preserve 30% of their natural resources or land in a sustainable way. So those were some thoughts.
Thanks so much. I will just perhaps to keep for me, because I was writing some notes, so some sentence you said that will stay forever. It was so far too fragmented. I guess this is really in line with what Bruce was very showing or summarizing from the report. And we need really to have a plan to deliver. So it's not just, we need the word deliver is really important. With you were mentioning the accountability. But perhaps to link with the other panelists, I want to ask, you were mentioning a lot of time the local level, working with local organization, local assessment. So perhaps I will ask the second panelist to focus on Abel. I will ask you really to, if in your reflection, how that local level adaptation is it something important that for you can see on the ground?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yes, local level adaptation is very important, and in this case, for me, being one of the people that is actually implementing some climate change programs at local level, I'm bringing to this fora like exactly what I've seen happening on the ground in terms of adaptation at local level, challenges and also opportunities that do exist. With my experience in terms of implementing adaptation-related programs on the ground at local level is that there is a huge gap, especially when it comes to decentralizing existing national policies. A number of policies, are being implemented at national level, and people are aware about some of these policies at national level. But if you go on the ground at the community level, there is gap in terms of information. So to enhance adaptation options, I think there is need also to try and translate these policies, strategies, to a level where the local communities themselves are able to understand what each policy is trying to achieve. Excuse me. The biggest one of the major challenges, obviously, is access to appropriate technology at local level. So there is need actually to mobilize technology at local level that will be able to help, especially the small-scale farmers, to be able to adapt to the adverse impacts of climate change. One such technology is, for instance, solar-powered irrigation technologies. because agriculture in Africa and also Zambia in particular, it is many rain-fed. So millions of smallholder farmers, they depend on rainfall, you know. So in terms of, let's say there is a drought, it becomes very difficult actually for smallholder farmers to be able to afford irrigation equipments. So that is one area that actually is lacking at local level. So the way forward is to try and come up with appropriate technology around irrigation, a technology that will be easily accessible by every farmer, and also extension services. This is very important because it's not everyone at community level that owns a radio or a television. So their main source of information is extension officers from the Ministry of Agriculture. There is a gap in some area whereby there is no presence of extension officers. So in order to enhance adaptation, or rather the flow of information, there is need to invest more into extension services. One other issue is to provide incentives for rural investment in the agricultural sector. In the absence of incentives, it becomes very difficult, for stakeholders to be able to invest into agricultural sector, especially at local level. This was one of the issues that actually we are trying to deal with in certain areas, to try and see how best we can provide incentives to smallholder farmers, so that there is more investment into the agricultural sector. My last point is there is need to mobilize financial resources. So at community level, the biggest challenge is actually access to finance. The smallholder farmers themselves or local NGOs, it's quite difficult to mobilize the much needed financial resources to invest into various climate adaptation programs. If at this level we are talking of various financial mechanisms, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, figures huge figures in $1 billion, but at that lowest level, they don't even they're not even aware of such kind of financial mechanisms. So we need to find a way. How then do we ensure that those that need this money the most have got access to this kind of funding? The modalities, or rather the requirements which are there to access finance, even at national level, is very, very difficult. It's not easy to access climate financing, even at national level. So bringing that to a local level is practically impossible. So we need to try and help those that need these resources to have access. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Trying to sum up, you mentioned two very important points. So the finance, and this is so related with the first speaker, was Walter, that was mentioning that only 10% of that trillions, but those trillions should reach the local level. So this is really your call. And you were mentioning also the adequation of road translation, use your word translate, national policies and strategies for really the small level. So taking this into consideration, so I will move to the next panelist on using those two words, finance and policies. And also, I guess BMZ Germany was involved in the G7, so we all have heard that there was some declaration. So if you can also how the world will react and how the G7, Germany also, on that finance and policies. What are you doing on your plan and so on? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you also to my previous speakers. I think my contribution can link quite well to this. So I want to talk a bit about what these findings that we heard from Bruce mean for German development cooperation. And for us in BMZ, the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals and also the Paris Agreement continue to provide the main strategic orientation for our work. We have recently adopted our core area strategy transformation of agri-food systems, and with that the BMZ has committed itself to a world without hunger within planetary boundaries, and that requires a fundamental transformation of our agri-food systems towards climate resilient and low emission pathways. And now this is all more urgent in a world where we are facing multiple crises at the same time. So we have climate change, but we also have COVID, we have conflicts, we have the Russian war against Ukraine, and all these crises together are leading to food insecurity, biodiversity loss and land degradation, security and health issues. And here it is crucially important not to start to play off one crisis against the other, or to weigh one goal against the other. So on the one hand, we need to provide a substantial and well-coordinated crisis response in the short term, but we also need at the same time to think about using this crisis as an opportunity to drive long-term transformation of agri-food systems and reach agri-food systems that are better equipped to absorb shocks, better adapted to climate change, and therefore better able to protect people permanently from the consequences of these crises. Now, Germany holds the G7 presidency in 2022 and is therefore currently in a leadership role to address these interrelated challenges and crises. And it is our concern to jointly work on solutions towards closing the gap in climate finance, especially in the agriculture sector, and also reaching the local level. And this is now, with these crises, really more urgent than ever. We have falling yields, we have supply shortages, rising prices, and they all threaten to lead to political destabilization in many countries. Every investment in climate change adaptation also is an investment in food security and political stability. Now I want to highlight two elements that Germany is emphasizing in this context under the G7 presidency. One is the importance of repurposing agricultural subsidies and thereby redesigning climate-damaging agricultural support measures. Here the goal is to eliminate disincentives and use the freed up funds to promote practices that increase the resilience of food systems, that have a positive impact on food security, on the environment, on climate and health worldwide. And the other element is that we also strive to value sustainable agriculture in its multifunctionality, that is contributing to food security, to poverty reduction, income, employment, ecosystem services in rural areas. So with the G7, we are therefore also working on creating compensation mechanisms that channel climate finance to small-scale farmers and allow them to earn a living income while contributing to agri-food system transformation, ecosystem services delivery, climate change mitigation and adaptation. Of course, beyond the G7, BMZ is also a substantial donor, for example, to the Least Developed Countries Fund and Agricultural and Adaptation Fund. BMZ supported almost 300 projects in the last 8 years with a value of 2.5 billion euros in the field of agriculture and climate change, and over 80% of that was spent on adaptation with a regional focus on sub-Saharan Africa. And since global challenges such as food security, climate change, biodiversity loss, land degradation, and conflicts, they're all closely interlinked, BMZ is also increasingly focusing on systemic land use approaches, promoting ecosystem-based adaptation, for example, nature-based solutions more broadly, as well as agroecology. We are convinced that we must stay focused, stay together, coordinate action across our global food systems to be able to jointly tackle multiple crises that we face. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Thank you. Very, very nice to see that leadership role of Germany, and that you're also bringing all that powerful nation with other nation together, but to reach also the local level. So you also are echoing and responding to the previous panelists that were playing you to, we need more finance, but that need to reach really the poor of the poorest. And also one point you added at the end, that's really, let's say, landscape approach, holistic approach, ecosystem-based adaptation, nature-based solution, agroecology, for the, let's say, the story, the small story within the big stories. During the adoption of the IPCC supplement for policymaker, in the supplement, I guess Bruce can confirm, there is no words of on NBS. There was a footnote saying that NBS, it's a concept of scientists, because it was not agreed internationally. No, we have an agreed definition of nature-based solution that was given at the last meeting of UNEP, of UN Assembly. So this is something perhaps I want to ask my colleague to link on that level of, that importance of ecosystem-based solution, on linking also with people, with what they have to teach us. So local knowledge, community knowledge, indigenous knowledge. So if you can elaborate on that.
Okay, I try. Thank you so much.
Julia.
Yeah, wonderful. Actually, Walter started talking about it. He called ecosystem-based adaptation a win-win. So that would be my starting point. I think this has been an extremely interesting start at the SB, starting with the IPCC report, with the Glasgow dialogue. I guess many of you have been sitting in all these meetings. So it's a great dialogue, and I try to be short so we have enough time to discuss. I think the question I'm asking myself here, because a lot of things are not new. No? So what is new, and what is the messages we're trying to get? And I really loved your presentation, very crisp, the usual style you have to bring it down. And I loved in particular the enabling environment question, because that's something which, reading through the IPCC, is kind of the game changer. No, it's just transformative. You didn't use the word, I was watching, but in theory you're describing what could be transformative. And this is where EBA and also the enlargement on the voyage we've been doing as a community throughout all the years, from sustainable production to a social encompassing kind of climate justice. You can put many names to that. I think looking and recognizing the people in the food system, right? This is really the game change, and this is where we're all learning, right? And just before the event, we heard it. I mean, even the loss and damage. Now, I don't want to talk about loss and damage, but it's the same people, the same stakeholders. Say we need to be part of that. Talk to us, right? I think that's really the opportunity we have here, and we just heard from Abel yet again. We know the money is not trickling down enough. No, some is. Maybe we increased. There's not enough financing for adaptation, EBA, et cetera, and there's a lot of maladaptation. And I think that's also this debate that has been already there for 10 years, but not sufficiently, no? Because that's something where the science and where we really need to carefully read the IPCC reports with the key recommendations. And I also like the way you summarize that in the publication. Maybe you can show it again. Where you really look at the trade-offs, right? The trade-offs and the co-benefits, which are not only mitigation, it is the co-benefits when you look at social issues. So I think that's very important to learn. But the key point I want to make is the inclusiveness, no? The recognition of local stakeholders playing a key role, indigenous peoples, women, youth, no? And that's also not new to you, but I guess this is where we need to step up. One small experience, given I have a short time only, I can share with you. FAO has been working with UNDP on a joint program where we work in 12 countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. And we started, the pickup point is the NAP. So I was interested to hear that NAP is actually an instrument that increases also the opportunity for inclusiveness. but also the NDC in terms of countries taking ownership, but taking also ownership for the participatory and inclusive consultation in not only designing it because it's set, the priorities are set, but actually in the implementation and deciding where funding should go. So we have so we're working with this 12 countries. It's a program that is funded by IKI, by the German government. But one of the key challenges, and I also heard that in terms of the difficulty to have many different actions, is to identify the transformative character, the system change, which sounds so broad, but it doesn't have to be everything. But I think everything we do and support and work with, we need to ask these tough questions. Is that transformative enough? Are we inclusive enough? Does it really reach? Because there's a high risk, and we need to de-risk. Inclusiveness means de-risking, working with people as making sure the money goes where it's most needed. And this is what I want to leave as a key message, that when we talk about transformative change, we need to make sure that it is enough system change and enough inclusive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We can applaud also. This is my colleague. I'm a good colleague, Julia. You forgive me to have missing you at the beginning? Okay. Oof, I'm safe. No, joke apart.
He's my boss.
No, we are co-leader. So, joke apart. You put new words in the game: game changer and transformative, and linking with what Bruce identified in the report, the social aspect. That is really, perhaps, for me, it's really difficult to summarize 300 pages. Even here we have 30 pages, but if you want to do that exercise, trying to summarize and extract even what we have new in that report, really the social aspect, the poverty angle, the poverty nexus, the livelihood aspect. There seems something that is very new and was reflected also in your intervention, Felicitas, when you mentioned that need to reach people. So that let's say, linking, we are back again to the SDG, to the Agenda 2030, or to link the different SDG, and they are all linked. So you cannot address SDG 13, climate change, without looking at SDG 2 on one, poverty, and SDG 2, I will manage food security. So we listen to you, but perhaps I would like to, you certainly, all of you individually, have to say something. So do not be shy. You can speak English. Look, I'm genetically depleted, and I managed to speak a little bit of Globish. So do not be afraid. Take the floor. I can see we have a gentleman here. So present yourself, please, who you are, and please be brief also to have much as possible intervene. Please, if you can stand up, it's even, people can.
Good afternoon. Carl Augustin from St. Lucia. I have two questions, or two contributions. One is from the perspective of, in the reports that you said that you basically read through to give us this presentation, were there any comparative analysis where you were looking at agroforestry systems compared to monocultures and so on, what predominates now? Number one. And two, have we looked at the supply chain related to agriculture? One from the impact on the climate change directly, as well as opportunities that may exist on the ground now for us to actually produce some of those things on the local level. So for example, just to be brief, if you look at it, most of the nutrients, most of the fertilizers and so on, the pesticides that are used in production come from the developed world, and they have to be transported to where the production happens. And this now actually translates to one of the cost points, one of the production costs that the farmer has no control over. So it also contributes directly to emissions because some of these are petroleum-based or use a lot of energy intensive in production and so on and transportation. So are we looking at systems where we would say, can we get more bio-based nutrients through things like composting, etc.? And will the technological transfer cover aspects such as these? Thanks.
Okay, thanks so much. I can see no others. I can collect more. Okay, so when you are reflecting on, thanks for breaking the ice among the audience. So I hope you will be an example for the other participants in the room. So perhaps the first question is for you, Bruce. Trying to simplify, is there any comparative advantage evident in that report on complex system in relation to more simple system?
Mm-hmm. Now, there's actually, in 10 minutes it was difficult to cover a lot of the stuff there, but there's quite a big section on diversification and the importance of diversification. So all different forms of it, mixed crop livestock systems, intercropping, all the different kinds of forms, not only also agroforestry. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. So I guess it's clear. The answer is yes.
Yes.
The other part is more complex, so I will ask if any of the panelists want to tackle that. There is different aspect in the second part, supply chain. The world is one connected, so it means that also you have a lot of energy-intensive product flowing. Should we have more in the solution, in the enabling environment, something more perhaps circular economy, bioeconomy? So, but you are also mentioning technology transfer. So, what is your reflection on that? So, any volunteer to answer to that or to propose some element of reflection? No volunteer? Julia, you look at me.
I can say something.
Ah.
Well, I think it's a very, very important question because, once the food system discussion started, you also had what is again the difference between food system supply chains, value chains. There's words used in a similar way. I think the important point here is, and it would be interesting to hear from other countries how they go about it. I think one of the principles of having more sustainable value chains is to, and that's like a mitigation topic as well, to really look through the value chain on what is the total emission factor. Of course, we all agree, I guess, the shorter the chain, the better it is, also for the prices. I think there's a lot of potential, let's say, and it's also interesting you note the energy question, because that's also absent, because often in the food discussion you don't have necessarily the energy discussion. So this is where the two communities or the two ministries or whoever is in charge need to come together to say, look at it from a comprehensive point of view, right? And then I think there's the dimension of food loss and waste, which is very key, again, in terms of the total emission factor. But the power of the consumer, right? It's the consumer choice. So, it's endless areas of work, but I think, again, this community can be a game changer in terms of setting policy dialogues in countries and enlighten people, or also what FAO does with a couple of countries is to kind of have better food labeling, right? So where consumers can know where it's from, how much the energy, calories is it, the energy. So there's lots of things happening, but there's no one solution. It really depends on a country by country, but I think that's the future, so we need to understand it better. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay, thank you so much. And you are still friends with Bruce because you said there is no only one solution. So Bruce was saying, I don't like people with only one solution. So. No, but I fully agree with all what you were mentioning. And at FAO, so here with my at FAO, this is also something that we are moving really from a productive system that was really perhaps FAO was focusing on a production aspect, in few years or even decades ago. Only we have more and more that food system approach. So we even sometimes say agriculture and food system or agri-food system. So we are really trying to connect all the dots from the production to the consumption and trying to eventually loop that. So this is something, and it's not just FAO, all organizations, all stakeholders. Last year we had the UN Food System Summit, and this is something really clear. So within the convention, the UNFCCC is set still perhaps there is too many perhaps sector and silo yet. On food system, it's cross-cutting with Abel also mentioned that in your intervention. You were mentioning your example you were providing was solar-powered irrigation. So you link also with the energy aspect at the end. So all is connected. So fine. Any more thought? So please.
Yes, thank you. I actually also want to talk about supply chains, and one of the most important things also is the whole legislative and enabling environment to make supply chains sustainable. So and you mentioned it, it's also the whole aspect of consumer countries being responsible in making supply chains sustainable. And here, just one example is the choices of products that we have in our supermarkets. Let's say we have coffee, we have chocolate, all products that here within Germany we receive from producing countries in the global south. We are also responsible to make sure that the producers of origin actually have an opportunity to generate a living income from the production of the products, of the commodities. And here a strong legislative environment is really key to also to have the sustainability aspect taken care of. So, for example, also to avoid deforestation that comes from supply chains. So that's one aspect I really want to emphasize. Thank you.
Okay, so no, all panelists are not shy any longer. James want to say something. I know that Walter also online want to say something. So we start with you, James, briefly. Oh, first, okay, Walter first.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to make I don't think the factors that are preventing us to move forward in all these discussions that we're having today is not lack of knowledge. We know that diverse systems are better than monoculture. We know that circular economies are better than the ones that we have now. We know that short food chains, supply chains are better than long ones. We know that renewable energy is better than non-renewable energy. I think what we need, and sometimes I get really anxious, it's not more knowledge. We have more than enough knowledge. In agronomic solutions, Bruce was saying, we have a lot of knowledge. The question is, how do we turn into action? What do we need to get more action? And I insist that I think that the key factor here is what Felicitas and Bruce and others mentioned, is the enabling environment. And the enabling environment means communicating better, more effectively with the private sector, with investors. Investors hate volatility. They hate to invest in something that they don't know if they're going to be a very good return or a lot of losses. Well, we need to connect those points. Is volatility in economics can be combated with good resilience. And we have to make those connections. An investment in the private sector will be less volatile if we increase resilience. So let's invest in resilience. The more vulnerable the systems in which we're investing are, the more volatile those investments will be. So I think we need to make a better efforts in connecting these communities. We often get stuck with more knowledge. We need to, continue developing knowledge. What are resilient production systems? And I think it's fine. There's always lots to learn. But I think we're at a point that the limiting factor is action. What do we need to act? What do we need to promote investment? What do we need to get more of these green bonds that are subject to performance and sustainability issues?
Okay, thanks so much. And I guess it's really clear on really the first part. We already have enough in our plate. Now we need to turn this into action on back again to the enabling environment and to unfold this on the ground. James, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just to say that we can think about the private sector, but we also have to think about the food or crops or livestock that aren't necessarily crossing from developing countries to developed countries, the ones that the private sector are less interested in, where the volatility of production perhaps is greatest. If we just focus more on the sort of those selective supply chains, then we sort of choose the kind of farmers that we're prioritizing. And I think we just have to be careful around that. Cocoa, coffee can be small-scale producer crops, obviously, but thinking about the staple crops which aren't as appealing, I think, is key. Diversity is critical. It's a strength in all aspects, and so couldn't agree more with the sort of the point on monocultures and trying to find new solutions to address the fertilizer costs and challenges. And those can be, as you say, sort of bio-based solutions, and that can be innovative, or that can be existing solutions that are working in communities. And just the idea of tech transfer as well, I don't quite like it. I think it's more about meeting farmers where they are and co-creating solutions, and a lot of institutions have to improve on how they do that, because there is a power imbalance in this, but I think it's key to do that. Oh, and then finally, carbon-based adjustment mechanisms. So I'm curious, and it's a learning thing for me to see, is this going to penalize production in low-income countries? We have to be very careful that some of the more intensive production that happens, and which may produce more greenhouse gases, isn't punished by importing markets. And that's just something that I'm trying to learn more about.
Okay, I will not respond to that because we will open a debate on. We have the controller of the time that is already saying to me that we are over time, but this is something I pick, perhaps also for the concluding remarks, something we can also include. Abel, from you were with, but really briefly, because we are already, I have already a lot of enemy.
Okay, yes. Private sector participation is very important in this case. But what is important is to come up with deliberate policies that will attract the participation of the private sector in this value chain. And also, from what I've seen myself on the ground, is that there is need to promote more of cash crops, that will enable the private sector to get involved, because for them it's about profit making. So cash crops like maybe soybeans, for instance, sunflower. These are some of the crops that which perhaps could also be promoted at local level.
Okay, thanks for very concrete and precise example. So there was one gentleman that was waiting for long, but no, you have less than 1 minute. You have 30 seconds.
Yes, thanks. I'm Bernard. I work with Yara. It's a private sector company, fertilizer. We're based in Norway, but we work globally. Happy to engage on circular economy, etc. afterwards. But to the question. So access to capital for farmers and small local agribusinesses is extremely expensive because this is seen as a high-risk business. On the other hand, if we had a stern report looking at the overall cost and risk of not investing into resilience and adaptation, I think those risks easily by far outscale the risks of losing capital on your investments. So to perhaps in particular James and Felicita, how do you see that we can leverage commercial capital alongside with other financing mechanisms in order to overcome that risk aversion and high interest rates on commercially available capital?
Okay, straightforward question. Do you have the answer? It's a complex question. It's a risk against risk, basically.
I don't have the answer to your question, to say that upfront, but of course it is something that we also think about. And I was mentioning before, just to give one example, what we're currently trying to do is we're thinking about setting up a compensation mechanism linking or channeling more climate finance to the local level. And actually this is exactly one mechanism that would support such a scheme, because we're looking at different concrete mechanisms that we can employ for bringing climate finance to the local level, or different type of finance to the local level. And just in a pilot that we're starting, we're thinking about linking farmers more to the voluntary carbon market, but also using payment for ecosystem services, using public funds to then also incentivize private companies to engage in these payment for ecosystem services with their producing and supplying farmers for their supply chain. So this, I think, it goes into this whole more like blended finance direction, but really trying to see where can public resources and also institutional setups support taking away some of this risk and covering some of these expenses so that private companies can more easily.
Okay.
Sorry,
you were saying,
it was too long.
I have not the answer, but you have some good element.
So I think thinking about adaptation and resilience not only as a downside but as an upside. So not only as trying to prevent the impacts in a bad year, but also trying to improve the averages in a good year, and trying ways to sort of measure and cost in the benefits into investment decisions. There've been some discussions around debt at all different kind of levels, and keeping that in the back of our mind as we go into these discussions as well. Different organizations have different roles. Philanthropy can maybe be more risk tolerant. We can maybe have first loss tranches, things like that. But each organization needs to work together, and I don't think we've found necessarily a great way to do that. Maybe finding other ways to pay for benefits, be it sort of ecosystems or carbon sequestration, and factoring those into discussions on adaptation. The challenge there is obviously different capabilities. Carbon sequestration in sub-Saharan Africa is very difficult because of the soil health, and you need other nutrients to capture that, and how long is it captured in the soil and so forth. But maybe that's another thing. And I don't think it's about metrics and measurement. I think it's more about analytics of current metrics and measurements, if that makes sense as well. But so I think I've not answered your question in 5 different ways, so I'm very sorry.
So it showed that your question was extremely good, because it's difficult to answer, not straightforward, but this is one of the questions we all together have to answer at a certain point in time on the shortest as possible. Now we are moving to the conclusion. So perhaps I will ask, so please, if you can sit. So Lwembe, so sorry for the pronunciation, Lwembe, Mwale. So you present here COMESA, so with a hat where you have more than several tens of countries. So what are your take from you heard today in the discussion also? So over to you.
Thank you so much. I think several issues have come out of this interesting dialogue, and I was just trying to think as issues were being presented in terms of from the 60th assessment report of the IPCC. What came to my mind was also the global assessment report of 2022, and trying to link the two and trying to basically compare in terms of the development trajectory that we are on as the global system. Now, in terms of when you look at the GAR report of 2022 and also the IPCC report, there's one similarity that comes out. it mentions to say the current development trajectory is not consistent with the Paris Agreement, but also with the SDGs, particularly SDG number 2. In short, what the GAO report says is that we are creating more risks as compared to creating resilient systems. Now, what is coming out from this discussion, colleagues, is that the research is there, evidence is there. The challenge is action on the ground. For instance, are we creating resilient systems or are we creating more risks? Now, according to the GAO report, we are creating more risks. So I think the key messages that are coming out is that climate change impacts on crops, value chains, food production systems continues to increase. Also, there's issues of maladaptation in terms of the current policy that is there, not sufficient enough to tackle the current adaptation needs in the food systems. There's also issues of lack of economic or institutional feasibility, an enabling environment, and also climate information in terms of extension services is not enough. So I think the key takeaways is that in whatever we're doing, we need to promote ecosystem-based adaptation. We need to allocate more funding to adaptation. That point came out clearly in the discussions. There is need for private sector engagement and also creation of an enabling environment. And this basically has to do with creation of policies that attract, for instance, investment from the private sector. When you look at agricultural systems, there was a mention to say the world faces several crises. We have, for instance, COVID, we have the war in Ukraine, also we have issues to do with climate change. And then when you look at assessments that have been done, global population is going to grow by to 10 billion by 2050. So the question now that is there is, with climate change in view, are we going to manage to feed a population of 10 billion people by the year 2050? And the answer is no, because we're not doing enough in terms of adaptation in the food systems. So if we are to meet the food requirements by 2050, we need to increase adaptation efforts in the agriculture as well as food systems. The point that came out strongly is evidence is there, research has been done, action on the ground is very little. Also, there is need for inclusiveness, especially including the indigenous peoples and local knowledge. There is also need for more balance in adaptation as compared to mitigation, because the current trend is that more emphasis is being given to mitigation as well as compared to adaptation. And so the key takeaways from there is that there is need for total transformation at private sector level, at government level, in terms of how we address issues of adaptation in the food systems. Because currently millions are going to bed hungry, but with the impact of climate change, more billions of people are expected to go to bed hungry because of lack of adaptation. So I think those are the key takeaways: more investment in adaptation, creating an enabling environment, private sector engagement. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So we can applaud. So no ambiguity, very clear. So I just want to ask Bruce if you have something just to add, but I have one question for you. People are asking where we can find this publication. So if you can also answer to that.
Okay. The publication is on the Clim-Eat website. I believe it's already up, so you can, if you search Clim-Eat, and you'll find it on the website. Clim-Eat.org. So just some quick takeaway points. I should have mentioned transformative change much more often. Julie reminded me of that. I think what you mentioned is all about this local action, getting action happening on the ground. I think these like mechanisms such as payment for environmental services and payments for resilience building are really crucial as part of the solution. Then we talked a lot about finance. I mean, the food system is $1 trillion business. How do we get those markets working so smallholders can be part of it? 40 billion in imports per year in Africa. How do you make national and local markets work? So there is money in the system, and that's about de-risking the system, investing in resilience. And lastly, accountability, holding everybody accountable to all the initiatives that are put up, the actions that are promised. So it's nice that James mentioned, for example, the Glasgow breakthrough is going to put indicators in place and measure progress.
Okay, thanks so much. So this is what we need, really. Science, policy interface with all other stakeholders, private foundation. So this is like that we will be one day soon be able to respond to the question we had in the room really precisely. So we have all the elements, but we need really to turn this into action. So once again, I want really to thank all our panelists. Walter for being also online. I know it's not easy to be online. We all want to be in a room nowadays. So please, a big round of applause for all our panelists. And once again, thanks to the organizers, so Columbia University, Food, Agriculture and Natural Resources Policy Analysis Network, Clim-Eat, so clim-eat.org for the report. And FAO was really pleased to join to those partners. And I want to thank all of you for your participation, your presence. It shows us really that we have to act and to tackle the adaptation gap. So thanks so much. You want to rush me? And I engage all of you to discuss and to reach out the panelists also, because the discussion is just starting. Oh, yeah, we will have a picture of the panelists. So please, the panelists that are present in the room. You are, no, I'm not a panelist. I am a no one. Also me. Okay. So I beg you 30 seconds of